Well, you may be getting tired of hearing me talk about the Lotus Sutra, but it truly was one of the most influential, if not the most influential book on my journey within the Buddha Dharma. Partly because it was the one book with scriptures other than Lankavatara that was available to me back in the day when I first got turned on to Buddhism in 1979. And the particular volume that I dived into and dwelled in and immersed myself in deeply at that time was this particular version published by the Kosai Company. And it's a great volume. Now, it has been upgraded with new translators, and perhaps some of those translations are in some ways more accurate, but I still look to this one for my own heritage, if you will, from the standpoint of it having contained language that's very familiar to me and it's very comforting to me as I read and reread passages. I will mention that Gene Reeves has also, I believe, done a translation of all three of the sutras, namely the Lotus Sutra, but also the one preceding it, which is the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, and then the one afterward regarding the great Bodhisattva Samantabhadra. So anyway, in this particular set of musings for this video, I wanted to go back to a couple of pages within chapter 2 of the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, which actually, if you look on my channel at the playlists, in the playlist regarding, perhaps I've labeled it Innumerable Meanings, I can't recall, but I literally recited a translation of these couple of pages from multiple translations. In other words, there are other translations of the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings that stand alone, such as the BDK version, which has a volume that contains both the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings and the Samantabhadra Sutra. But again, there are only those two that I'm aware of that have all three sutras within the same volume. So what are these two pages? In this particular translation, page 12, where the Buddha is addressing one of the great bodhisattvas in the assembly, and there are many of them. Keep in mind again that this is a preamble to the Lotus Sutra. As I recall, there are about 80,000 great bodhisattva mahasattvas in the assembly. And of course, mahasattva just means great being. So these are like bodhisattvas who have attained advanced standing with their particular array of self-power accomplishments. But anyway, the Buddha was addressing one of these particular bodhisattva mahasattvas. His name was Great Adornment. And so what he said was good sons. And of course, to be honest, part of what I like less about the newer version of this is I think that the translators talk in terms of the Buddha's children. And, you know, we do view in some sense Buddha as a kind of father of all humanity, but to use the term children to me is a little infantilizing. Now, what I might prefer is good sons and good daughters, and there are places in the sutra that he says that, but and where it's translated that way. But again, this is a scripture, as are many scriptures of the time at around 100 AD, when it was more or less a patriarchal type of society, and there wasn't as much recognition of the equality between men and women that we have now. But anyway, if you can get past that, what the Buddha says in this translation is, good sons, there is one doctrine which makes bodhisattvas accomplish perfect enlightenment quickly. If a bodhisattva learns this doctrine, then he will accomplish perfect enlightenment. Well, since the whole Mahayana canon is really designed, in my opinion, to be a training guide for training bodhisattvas, what's not to like about this particular offer, if you will? The one doctrine that's going to be key to bodhisattvas attaining enlightenment. And by the way, in a lot of Buddhist traditions now, followers will take bodhisattva vows. There are four primary bodhisattva vows, or there are an array of 10 of them also elaborated in the Avatamsaka Sutra. So, but again, these folks that we are talking about are mahasattvas. They're great bodhisattvas, but of course they're also quasi-mythical, if you will. I mean, these are what I think of as cosmic bodhisattvas. So the cosmic Buddha, if you will, is asking this cosmic bodhisattva. He says, there is one doctrine which makes bodhisattvas accomplish perfect enlightenment quickly. If a bodhisattva learns this doctrine, then he will accomplish perfect enlightenment. So let's find out what is that doctrine. And of course, Great Adornment responds, World Honored One, what is this doctrine called? What is its meaning? How does a bodhisattva practice it? And World Honored One is a very common epithet for the Buddha, and I like it. World Honored One, honored within the world. And I think any Buddha would certainly warrant that kind of title. The Buddha said, good sons, this one doctrine is called the doctrine of innumerable meanings, which is how it's translated in this particular volume. I think another translation might be immeasurable meanings. A bodhisattva, if he wants to learn and master the doctrine of innumerable meanings, should observe that all laws or existences were originally, will be, and are in themselves void in nature and form. And by the way, in one of my recent videos, one of my subscribers gave an extended comment on why he likes the term void rather than emptiness. But here we have one of the few places that within the Threefold Lotus Sutra there is reference to, in effect, shunyata, or emptiness, or void. So what is the nature of all existences? They are neither great nor small, neither appearing nor disappearing, neither fixed nor movable, and neither advancing nor retreating. And the bottom line here is, and they are non-dualistic, just emptiness. So here is the basic teaching of non-duality, which gets at the fact that, in order to attain perfect enlightenment, what the bodhisattva has to do is to somehow transcend or get past the obstacle of our ordinary thinking mind, which by definition breaks things down into this versus that and operates in a dualistic fashion. Now, once that's attained, if it is by any particular advanced trainee or bodhisattva, that they also have to realize that non-dualism is also empty, but that's another story. So here he's giving the basic doctrine of non-dualism. However, he says there's a caveat here. All living beings, however, discriminate falsely, which is what I just said. 99.9% of us, we do discriminate this versus that, good versus bad. Young versus old, you name it. Any kind of dichotomy is a way of dualistically thinking, and that is by definition what we typically do, and what the Buddha is saying is that is false thinking, to make those kinds of somewhat arbitrary distinctions. Again, he says, all living beings, however, discriminate falsely. It is this, it is that, and it is advantageous, or it is disadvantageous. They entertain evil thoughts, make various evil karmas, and thus transmigrate within the 6 realms of existence. So in a way, it's this discriminative thinking, this dualistic thinking, this conclusion that we come to that certain scenarios are advantageous and some are disadvantageous, that leads, this false thinking leads to problems. It leads to behaviors and actions that are contrary to a pro-social kind of environment within our social relations with each other. And, that results in suffering, both our own suffering and suffering of those who we impinge upon with our various kinds of angry and hateful attitudes. And he goes on to say, and these beings suffer all manner of miseries, and cannot escape from there during infinite kotis of kalpas. So we're kind of stuck in this framework of being burdened by, in more generic terms, by the so-called three poisons. The greed that we have of wanting to draw things to us that we want, which results in the clinging that the basic Four Noble Truths talks about as being the source of suffering. Or we have aversion, where we want to push things away, which again can result in anger and hate toward others, and toward various kinds, including hate toward ourselves, by the way. And ignorance. And ignorance is the fact that we do view reality in this dualistic manner that is false and that does lead to these problematical outcomes. So what should the Bodhisattva do? Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, observing rightly like this, in other words, understanding the dynamics associated with this problem of most beings suffering from this discriminative thinking mode, that Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, observing rightly like this, should raise the mind of compassion. Of course, that's the key teaching for Bodhisattvas, is have pity on these people. You need to try to help them to get out of their suffering mode of existence. And having raised a mind of compassion, display the great mercy, desiring to relieve others of suffering, and once again penetrate deeply into all laws. So the whole point of Buddhism is to reduce suffering, to increase happiness. And that's what the Buddha is encouraging the Bodhisattvas to do, by virtue of understanding the dynamics of what causes suffering in beings. But then part of the answer to how they can go about helping beings is they have to dive back into these laws. They have to dive back into the way that the beings think, and to have a deeper understanding of the problem so that they can come up with some solutions. So again, he's encouraging them to penetrate deeply into all laws. And here's the way those laws work. According to the nature of a law, such a law emerges. According to the nature of a law, such a law settles. According to the nature of a law, such a law changes. According to the nature of a law, such a law vanishes. According to the nature of a law, such an evil law emerges. According to the nature of a law, such a good law emerges. Settling, changing, and vanishing are also like this. So that strikes me as a pretty good way of expressing the fundamental nature of reality as being impermanent, which is one of the three characteristics of reality, according to Buddhism, along with suffering and non-self. Bodhisattvas, having thus completely observed and known these four aspects from beginning to end, should next observe that none of these laws settles down even for a moment, but all emerge and vanish anew every moment, and observe that they emerge, settle, and change and vanish instantly. So there again, this relates to my notion of karma, is that impermanence is the true nature of things. And one of the implications is, I, John, am not exactly the same person now as I was at the beginning of this video. And so that's how I think of karma in terms of, various lives, past lives, future lives. I don't think of it in terms of, who was I back, before I was in my mother's womb per se. But, there are causes and conditions over the course of my lifetime such that who I am and what I do right now is a function of all the various things that I previously have done and said, and all the acts that I've taken and the attitudes that I've had, and how I've acted or not acted upon those various attitudes. So that's what the Bodhisattva is supposed to observe. After such observation, we see all manner of natural desires of living beings. So yes, we have desires, and everybody has desires. Everybody has things that they want, whether, again, it's wanting to bring things toward us or wanting to push things away from us. And so here's the point. here's where we're getting to the notion of innumerable meanings and the methodology for teaching and preaching that the Buddha is recommending to these bodhisattvas, because he says, as natural desires are innumerable, preaching is immeasurable. And as preaching is immeasurable, meanings are innumerable. The innumerable meanings originate from one law. This one law is namely non-form. So he comes all the way back to voidness, emptiness, non-form. But within the context of bodhisattvas trying to help beings, they have to dive back into the world of form, understand what the desires are of any particular individual or group of individuals, and through that understanding, gain an appreciation for what kinds of meanings, what kinds of doctrine, what kinds of spiritual paths can be articulated that will help that individual or that group to make progress on the spiritual path in the direction of themselves manifesting in a more explicit way compassion toward others and furtherance toward what would be called within Buddhism perfect enlightenment or even Buddhahood. But he wants to emphasize this non-form, to say such non-form is formless and not form. Being not form and formless, it is called the real aspect of things. So, again, we're going from formlessness or emptiness into the dualistic reality that beings themselves experience and view in their own perceptions. And this is where we think about the Heart Sutra, where form is not different than emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. There is neither existence nor non-existence. It is neither empty nor non-empty. The reality is neither dualistic nor non-dualistic. So this is really taking the bodhisattvas a further step in saying that this being not form and formless is also called the real aspect of things. And if they can do that, if they can appreciate this perspective that the Buddha is recommending, then, quote, the mercy which bodhisattva mahasattvas display after stabilizing themselves in such a real aspect is real and not vain. They excellently relieve living beings from suffering. Having given relief from sufferings, they preach the law again and let all living beings obtain pleasure. So once bodhisattvas, acting as surrogate teachers, if you will, for the Buddha himself, can help beings to disengage from the kind of clinging that causes the suffering, then give them some pleasurable kinds of narratives, some wonderful, what I think of as mythopoetic narratives that can help relieve some of their anxieties and fears about the future. And here, I would point to the narrative within Jodo Shinshu or Shin Buddhism, where we have the notion of the cosmic Buddha Dharmakara making a vow that is made especially for me, to the effect that by merely entrusting in him, I'll be reborn in his pure land of bliss when I die, and at that time become Buddha in a way that's consistent with my aspirations, in a way that I can't possibly attain within this life. And then the Buddha simply goes on to sort of laud this approach that he's recommending when he says, a bodhisattva, if he practices completely the doctrine of the innumerable meanings like this, will soon accomplish perfect enlightenment without fail. The Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, such a profound and supreme great vehicle, is reasonable in its logic, unsurpassed in its worth, and protected by all the Buddhas of the three worlds. No kind of demon or heretic can break into it, nor can any wrong view of life or death destroy it. Therefore, if you want to accomplish supreme Buddhahood quickly, you should learn and master the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, such a great, profound, and supreme great vehicle. And then, if you can stand listening to a little more, I'll share, I don't know if you want to call it a parable or a metaphor, that the Buddha uses to help explain this. He says, the law, which is the Buddha Dharma, or in this case, this doctrine of innumerable meanings that he has articulated, the law is like water that washes off dirt. And think about this when you're hearing this is, again, chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra of expedient means. That's really what it is. It's skillful means. It's using techniques for teaching that a particular individual or group can relate to because of their own predispositions, their own psychological makeup and sort of spiritual stage, if you will. The law is like water that washes off dirt. As a well, a pond, a stream, a river, a valley stream, a ditch, or a great sea, each alike effectively washes off all kinds of dirt, so the law water effectively washes off the dirt of all delusions of living beings. And the delusions are the ignorance aspect of the three poisons. The nature of water is one, but a stream, a river, a well, a pond, a valley stream, a ditch, and a great sea are different from one another. The nature of the law is like this. There is equality and no differentiation in washing off the dirt of delusions, but the three laws, the four merits, and the two ways are not one and the same. And that's a reference to various sort of doctrines that I can't necessarily take the time to explain right now. But he goes on with this metaphor to say, though each washes equally as water, a well is not a pond is not a stream or a river, nor is a valley stream or a ditch a sea. As the Tathagata, namely himself, the world's hero, is free in the law, all the laws preached by him are also like this. Though preaching at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, all alike effectively wash off the delusions of living beings, the beginning is not the middle, and the middle is not the end. And here he's referring to a comparison between when he taught, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path versus when during the Mahayana era, for example, he was teaching the six paramitas and the Bodhisattva path. Preaching at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end are the same in expression, but different from one another in meaning. And then he goes on to be much more explicit about this, talking about the time when he rolled the law wheel of the Four Noble Truths for the five men, his colleagues at that time. But I'm going to leave it there and again, encourage you, if you haven't been exposed to it, to check out the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings. And even though I would have to certainly own for my own self, although you can decide for yourself, that I'm not in a position to sort of implement this law of innumerable meanings to be able to make very much progress in either attaining enlightenment or helping beings with suffering. I guess by sharing some of these musings, I'm doing the best I can, with an understanding that none of this is going to help me, get to enlightenment. But it's something I'm interested in, and so I'll continue to do it while I personally rely upon Amita's vow to get me to the other shore. Namandabs. Namandabs. Namandabs.